Philip says the party is about to come into a town for the first time after starting the campaign in the wilds. Okay, so you started out wilderness, we're going into town. What is the one thing that I haven't thought about preparing it? Hard to say, right? Towns can have I when I make a town, I tend to think of a macro concept, like what's their main trade, what's the main thing that they do, that a lot of the, like a lot of small towns that I think of in the real world, they often have like one factory that employs most people. So maybe a town in D&D would, maybe most of them work in the lumber yards, they go out into the forest. Maybe I once made a town called Marlboro, which was very smoky, like cigarette smoke, because they did a lot of factories and stuff like that. Finding a little thing to latch onto, and then most of the time players kind of know the different tropes of like, oh, let's look for a shop at a tavern. Think of some fun stuff. Make some quick names for them, so that it's not just, oh, the tavern, because it shows that you put some thought into it, and maybe you give it a little bit of flavor. And you can think of a quirk, like this tavern, instead of it just being the regular tavern, maybe they serve their drinks in something weird, like take a mushroom toadstool, flip it upside down, and put the drink. Something weird, but it makes people remember it, and it doesn't have to make sense necessarily.
I have a lot of beef with shops in D&D, because I've played in games where it's like, okay, you've reached this town, like you said, you've been exploring, it's been a long time, you've reached this town, what do you want to do? It's always, let's go check out the shop. And DMs are always like, okay, I've got a randomized table, 1d20, let's roll to see what's in the shop. And it's always the items that you'd expect. It's like, you can get a healing potion, you can get a bag of holding, like, great, I love those things, but it's not very exciting. And we just recorded a video yesterday kind of talking about this, but we'll just reiterate it again. We think it's really fun to just have random, like, come up with some items that are not D&D based at all. Like, this person makes cheeses, and these cheeses give you different abilities. Like, maybe you had about a bit of some mold on that cheese, and you get -1 to your perception rolls for the next hour, but
because you're a little queasy.
But you gain resistance to poisons or something. Just like make some items that are very unique and have very explicit abilities, or like concepts, and maybe the players don't even have to know what they are, but they find out once they use them. Like, it could even be like, give them a flute that calls every bird within a 1 mile radius to the person when they use the flute. Like, something that's not D&D in the actual D&D like books, but it has very specific fantastical functions that make your players remember.
You could also ask players, tell me one food your character loves and one food they hate. This is something I did with Curse of Strahd when they first started, and a few people said they hated potatoes. So all the time in Barovia, they'd come across potatoes and just be like, oh, just potatoes again, And that was just a fun role-playing thing that I kind of pulled out of them, that they wouldn't have thought, like, oh, what's my favorite food, What did my mom make for me? That can be fun. And then also, you could kind of riff on some real world, like, instead of having an IHOP in your setting, maybe you have a National House of Pancakes or Flapjacks, National House of Flapjacks. So it's Nihoff. Go eat at Nihoff instead of IHOP. And the players can kind of laugh that you kind of did a twist on a real world thing. And maybe it's a lot like the real world, but in fantastical times, medieval style. Those are things you can have some fun with. Yeah. Who hates potatoes? Yeah. I don't like 3 players all said like, oh, I hate potatoes. And I was like, why? Why did they all say potatoes? I don't know. Hey, James, thank you. Thanks for the $10. Our IHOP's in Barovia Goth. Yeah, like, so IHOP in Barovia is like you walk into a Hot Topic, but instead of them selling you like plaid skirts and eyeliner, they sell you pancakes and hash browns, which the hash browns will be controversial because potatoes are so controversial.
I would be very wary about what type of syrup you use. You never know if they're going to use like bitter nightshade syrup, or I don't know. Well, like, Barovia is supposed to be this like dark, dim place anyway. Like, I can't imagine they've got very tasty food.
Okay, so Morgantha's pies. What if she runs like an IHOP cart instead and does flapjacks? Like, now, next time I run Curse of Strahd, I'm gonna reflavor Morgantha's pies into something more interesting.
I was very wary of meat pies in general in D&D. Yeah. So if you reflavored it of like, hey, they're doing pancakes, you're like, yeah, pancakes are harmless. That's a great idea.
Of course, controversial hash browns, yeah, and frowny face whipped cream on the pancakes.
You know, I'd expect most of the food to be pretty moldy and old and stale anyway in Barovia.